So the growth that we are having in Zimbabwe now and the confidence that our investors are having now in Zimbabwe is premised on the innovation that we are having around sanctions. Zimbabweans are the sharpest brains you can have in the world. A diasporian should look at the things that Zimbabweans use every day, because the environment is friendly, both politically and also legally and at a policy level. Corruption is ubiquitous. You find corruption in Zimbabwe and other countries. The best way to start is to find information, and the best way to start is to start by doing. Put sticks in your ears when you get to hear negativity about Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe right now is the best place to be, the best place to invest in.
Mastermind Podcast. In real life, I'm not happy 247.
But if you know me and I don't know you, to you, I am a celebrity.
There is always a reason to love. People that say they love unconditionally for no reason, it's a big lie.
Mastermind Podcast.
A show where we give you nothing but nuggets. Greetings, guys, and welcome to your show, the Mastermind Podcast. And I'm your host, Adoration Bizure, and you know it, guys. On this show, we give you nothing but life nuggets. And today we are privileged to have on the show Mr. Liberty Bizure. I'm Adoration Bizure, he's Liberty Bizure. But I'm not going to dwell on the relationship between us. It's a story for another day. But on today's show, we are going to be talking about investment opportunities in Zimbabwe. And I'm not going to introduce him to you guys. I think it's fair enough if he introduces himself to you. Mr. Bizure.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether the story for another day should not be talked today or should not be discussed today.
You can talk about it.
We'll discuss it some other day.
Yeah.
But yes, my name is Liberty Bizure. I am an entrepreneur in Zimbabwe. I'm a lawyer by profession, and I'm a businessman in my own right, under the Zimba flagship. And that's basically what I do. And I've been in Zimbabwe for the past 42 years that I have been here on earth. So that's basically me. I'm passionate about growing business, about building Zimbabwe, about making Zimbabwe the best investment destination in the world, because it befits it to be such.
Okay, that's really interesting. And going back to the question, to the introduction that we informed the viewers that we are going to be talking about investment opportunities in Zimbabwe.
Okay.
Are there opportunities of investment in Zimbabwe?
Of course. Zimbabwe, for you to understand the country Zimbabwe, you have to before we discuss the investment opportunities, you have to appreciate the outlay of Zimbabwe in to the extent of it having the best resources in two categories. I am convinced that in Southern Africa, or if not in Africa as a whole, Zimbabwe is the only country which has the most sought after resources in one place, in one territory. There was a report that came out years back that said Zimbabwe had 48 of the 51 most sought after minerals. And you cannot discuss about Zimbabwe without talking about its mineral resource, its natural resources, and also its human capital resource. So for anyone who wants to invest in Zimbabwe, the basic thing to look at is on the capability of the country in regards natural resources and the human capital. So as you know that in regards human capital, Zimbabweans are everywhere. Zimbabweans are the sharpest brains you can have. I stand on top of a hill and say Zimbabweans are the sharpest brains you can have in the world. You'll find Zimbabweans even in the most critical places in the Silicon Valley. You'll find Zimbabweans here in Dubai. You'll find them in the most critical places where innovations are happening. And on the natural resources side, we've got vast tracts of land. We've got minerals. We've got minerals that cannot be quantified even in terms of gold. We failed to quantify the amounts of gold in our country, let alone to say Zimbabwe owns or is got the reserves of 26% of the world's diamonds. They reside in Zimbabwe. So if we want to talk about investment opportunities, the two conceptualizations areas would be to look at the capital resource and the natural resource. And Zimbabwe is at par. No one has such resources. I stand to be corrected, and I stand to have a debate with anyone else who would want to speak of their nation to be better than Zimbabwe in that regard.
Okay, I can see that you are really a patriot.
Yeah.
And it's something that is good. But coming to think of what is on the ground, Mr. Bizure, the news that is trending and the things that are happening. I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I read somewhere, and I have seen that some of the big companies, investment companies that were investing in Zimbabwe, I think Choppies is one of them, Better Bricks, and some other companies, they're actually struggling. And some of them, they are seeking legal recourse to the High Court and all.
Yeah.
And
Look, what it is that in any investing or in any business environment, you've got your ups and downs. There are so many factors and variables that influence a business environment or an investment climate. Before I come to those companies or before I come to the militating factors against investments in Zimbabwe, let me talk about that which draws people to invest in Zimbabwe. Investments is premised on a good political environment, which we have now in Zimbabwe. We are stable, and the coming in of the new dispensation has brought about that. And the security on investment, which is a policy issue, which is a legal issue as well, is now being guaranteed. And there's so much guarantees on return on investment, even on foreigners, at a policy level and at a legal framework, to the extent that you can bring in your money in Zimbabwe and safely, move it to any destination of choice without hassles as was before. The current administration is putting those systems in place to ensure that there is safety. Zimbabwe becomes a safe haven for capital. Zimbabwe becomes a safe haven for international capital. You can see that in the construction sector, in the manufacturing sector, in the agricultural sector. You will see it in mining. We've got huge investment in mining. And we, as of last year, we are now in 2025, as of last year, we had reached the 8 billion of the 12 billion target of the mining sector, by 2030. So assuredly, you will see that by 2030, we would have covered that gap. And Zimbabwe would become a $12 billion mining giant or mining sector in that regard. Same applies with the agricultural sector, manufacturing sector, energy sector, etc., etc. So those are the areas that we would want would be investor, be it a Zimbabwean in the diaspora or an outright a foreign investor, to look at, to come and put their money, to come and inject their capital, because the environment is friendly, both politically and also legally and at a policy level. You and I would know that for a long time, Zimbabwe had suffered policy inconsistencies where policies would change here and there, and that was putting a huge dent on investor confidence. But of late, you can plan because the policy is consistent, and you can plan 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, because we now know that the direction with which the economy is going is guaranteed, and it's for growth.
Okay. And one of the major stumbling blocks that many have considered to, and even the government has also spoken about, is corruption. Mm-hmm. And I have seen that in the past, maybe decade or so, there's been a lot of corruption that has been happening in the country. And so how do you now, you are saying that investment is, the opportunities are here, and we have such a stumbling block. How do you now make it, at par?
Corruption is not only a Zimbabwean problem. Corruption should not be viewed, while we do not condone it, and we condemn it in the utmost we can. We should view corruption, I've said it on different forums, that corruption should now be elevated, not only in Zimbabwe, from not just being a criminal offense, but to also being a security threat to the state itself. Corruption is ubiquitous. You find corruption in Zimbabwe and other countries. I can't say other countries, their names, because it won't be professional, but corruption is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. But in the case of Zimbabwe, it is the elephant in the room. But I let me hasten to say that I am impressed and I'm encouraged by governments' strategies on curbing corruption. It had become institutionalized, and it had become so rampant, and that everywhere you go, you have to put up a bribe. Everywhere you go, you have to pay someone to have a document done, and you have to do this. But because of the whistleblower and the capacitation of ZAC to even now, they're talking of prosecuting their own cases, and the judiciary itself making no nonsense to corruption and having it elevated somewhat to a degree of it being a state security threat, because it has got direct ramifications to the security of the state. I foresee and I can say that the rate of corruption, street corruption, is reducing, while there is that level, yes, of what we call kleptocracy, where corruption is being done by one or two people who are in influential positions. But it's no longer the nature of Zimbabweans. Those are secluded cases, if there are any. And I am confident that in as much as it is ubiquitous, Zimbabwe is dealing with it in a way that is impressive and that is encouraging. And it should not be a hindrance for investment. The major hindrance, in my view, on investment is the debate, maybe which you don't want us to get into, is of sanctions.
No, we can talk about something.
Is of sanctions.
Yeah,
Zimbabwe is under sanctions. I have seen a lot of write-ups of people saying Zimbabwe does not have sanctions, it's corruption, not sanctions, this and that.
But in as far as I know, and the information that is on the public forum, is that sanctions, they are targeted sanctions. These sanctions, they are targeted to certain companies and to certain individuals. And
now, there are two categories of sanctions, if you want to discuss them. They are what they are calling restrictive measures, where they are restricting people from traveling, where they are restricting people from accessing funds, individuals, and that. But how do you say these are targeted when a company like ZDI, Zimbabwe Defense Industries, is put under sanctions? When actually the Zidera Act of 11 December 2001, if I'm not mistaken, or 2002, makes it explicit that no director of a multinational corporation or no director or representative of the American government on such boards should allow or sign for the lending of any financial support to Zimbabwe. That's sanctions targeted to Zimbabwe, not individuals. So the context of sanctions, people tend to talk about how they are targeting individuals, but they do not talk about how they have targeted our ZDI, how they have targeted the movement of capital into Zimbabwe, how they have made it difficult to move $5,000 from Washington to Zimbabwe, from China to Zimbabwe. Why? Because they are always watching how money is getting into Zimbabwe.
Okay, so how does me as an investor now going back to our topic, how does me as an investor find confidence in investing in a country where we know where I know that there are sanctions that are crippling it, as you are also confirming that sanctions, they are really crippling the economy?
Thank you very much for that question. That's a very pertinent question. You would look at a country like Cuba. Cuba has been under sanctions for the past years, or lived under sanctions for 40 years or more, or thereabouts. Cuba was not the only country put on such unilateral sanctions. There are many other countries. Their survival was premised on innovation around sanctions. So the growth that we are having in Zimbabwe now, and the confidence that our investors are having now in Zimbabwe, is premised on the innovation that we are having around sanctions. We have seen that there is no appetite on the people who put sanctions on us to remove those sanctions. So we are working with those sanctions, and we are making sure that we work with those that want to work with us. That's why we've got the policy of saying those that want to work with us, we are friendly and we are not enemies to any. And there's an influx from the Middle East, there's an influx from the other parts of the world, except those that put sanctions on us. So the movement of money is coming in. And that's why Zimbabwe has taken a policy of joining the BRICS, where the movement of, if the currency is coming in as it is now, the movement of money would be on other such institutions that are supra-state bodies, that are economic alliances, that are seeking free movement of capital without having it sanitized by New York and that. So we are innovating around it. So there is that confidence that our investors are having to say you can come from elsewhere. There's that innovation which the Ministry of Finance has done for the movement of capital into Zim.
Okay, and you also spoke about Zimbabweans being everywhere in the world, in every corner of the world. Isn't that a sign of a lack of confidence by its citizens in as far as investing their human capital, their human resource in their country?
Certainly not. It's a sign that Zimbabweans can survive anyway. The reason why Zimbabweans had to travel, and you find them everywhere, is that they were doing it for economic reasons. You and I know that between 2000 and around about 2017 or 2015, those were the worst days or worst years we had economically. Not to emphasize between 2008 and 2010 or thereabouts, where we had the worst inflation in the world. So this was caused by a myriad of reasons: sanctions, poor management, corruption, as you were saying, and a lot of other such variables that we can discuss about. But the presence of Zimbabweans everywhere is just a sign that they were seeking to survive, and they gained experience on how to survive and how to innovate and the technologies that are in other countries. And the question now is, are we going to utilize all those brains and all those experiences back home to build the economy of Zimbabwe in a more stable environment, to build the economy of Zimbabwe in an environment where there is guarantees for growth, where there is guarantees for return on investments, where there is guarantees on property rights, as is now. The land tenure management system that was put up by the president recently. All those are ways to guarantee property rights and they are legal, they are constitutional, and though there are debates on how it's being implemented, but what we talk about is the purpose. The purpose is just to empower the black man.
Okay. But from your own opinion, are we where we are supposed to be in as far as investment is concerned? And if we are not there, what's stopping us from being where we are supposed to be?
Certainly not. We are not where we are supposed to be. Why? Because the hand that was militating against us was a very strong hand. And we could have been better without all these negative variables that I've been discussing. Where we could be, we could have been a $10-15 billion economy now if we hadn't gone through these lost 20 years or so under harsh economic environment, which is caused by different reasons. We could have had the best road infrastructure. We could have had the best skyscrapers. We could have advanced in our ICT, in our AI, in our agro-processing. We could have advanced in our manufacturing, as it were. But we failed to do all that because of bad publicity, because of the sanctions, because of a bit of mismanagement, because of corruption, which has been the elephant in the room, which the government is now dealing with. So we could have been better, but we are where we are. But what needs to be done is to continue with what the current government is speaking towards, which is speaking against, yes, corruption, speaking against guarantees, and all these positives that we've been discussing.
Okay. So now I want you to talk to someone who's in the diaspora, because from this podcast is most of our people, they are people who are in the diaspora. What advice would you give to someone who is patriot as you are, and who is willing to, to invest back home, but they don't know how to start. They don't know how to, they just have the capital, they have their business idea, but they don't know which offices to enter. They don't know, they don't know where to start, basically.
All right. The best way to start is to find information, and the best way to start is to start by doing. Let them gather information on the areas that they want to invest in, for starters. We've got the Zimbabwe Investment, ZIDA, Zimbabwe Investment Development Agency, which would speak better in that regard. But my opinion is, if I were to tell a Zimbabwean who wants to invest back in home, I would say that the biggest area to invest in now is either in real estate and or the manufacturing sector. Why do I say so? If you would look at the current state of the Zimbabwean business environment, there is a serious mushrooming of matak shop, retailers, and all that. But they are selling basics, yes, they are selling tricklets at some points, but in the longevity of our business environment, you will not have retailers. The people that are going to stay in the Zimbabwean economy now are people who are going to manufacture something. The mushrooming of all those retailers, tuck shops, they are importing, and they are not quite on the basic and primary chain of production, which is sustainable. I would advise a diasporian that get a machine, get machines to Zimbabwe, get into the manufacturing sector, manufacture something. You are going to own the primary line, in the business chain. If you are going to produce something, you are guaranteed to be there for the next 50 years, 100 years. I do not see the longevity of running those small tuck shops, those small clothing outlets. I would rather have someone with capital come into Zimbabwe and produce cooking oil, for example, produce peanut butter at a large scale. I would rather have someone in Zimbabwe, I'm rather in diaspora, come to Zimbabwe and get into the manufacturing sector. Why? Because it's sustainable. And the manufacturing sector has to be, in my view, of the basics that people use every day. You can opt to go on the luxury side, but the spending power of Zimbabweans currently is not on the luxury per se. The average Zimbabwean is growing and seeking survival every day. So if you get into the manufacturing sector of manufacturing what people use every day, or if you get into the business of what people use every day, even if it's not manufacturing, but for example, if you get into the energy sector, if you get into LPG gas, if you get into the fuel sector, if you get into alternative energy sources outside electricity, your wind powered, your solar powered, or solar as a source of energy. Those are the basics that are growing to grow the economy of Zimbabwe, and that are sustainable for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years as Zimbabwe is booming its economy. So a diasporian should look at the things that Zimbabweans use every day. Get into manufacturing of those, or get into the provision of services that Zimbabweans get to use every day. For example, the health sector. If you are a doctor in the diaspora, why don't you come back home and build hospitals? Because there is no way that a hospital will not be needed in any country, whether first world or third world. It will be needed. Health services will be needed. Energy will be needed. Food production will be needed. Agro-processing will be needed. So let's move away. I would advise that a diasporan should move away from the businesses of luxuries to the business of the basics that Zimbabweans use every day. And they will make more money.
Okay, and also going back to the issue of our politics in Zimbabwe, is the environment really stable, considering grievances from other voices of the opposition? And
I'm not a politician myself, but what I can say is we have never been, I told you for the past 41 years, I've always been in Zimbabwe, but we have never been stable than we are now. If there's a better stability, we thrive for it. But where we are now is the best that we have seen since 1980, where there is engagement between the government and the people, where there is the engagement between the presidency and the people. Politics is a contestation of resources, who gets what, where, and how. So there's always that penchant by opposition to always pinpoint and want to naysay on those that are in government. But it's good for accountability. But whatever accountability it is, it should not be retrogressive. Whatever opinions that the opposition will have, it should not be retrogressive to development. It should aid development. It should then be defined to say we might have the differences that we have politically as political parties.
But are we divided amongst ourselves?
In opinion, it's natural that people have to be divided in opinion. You cannot have a country, even a home, where everyone thinks the same. People have to be divided in opinion, but they should not be divided on where we want to take.
If people are of the same mind, is it not ideal?
That's a utopian idea. That's egalitarian. That's utopian. You cannot find it anywhere where people think the same, where people are opinionated in the same manner. But the point that I want to make is we can be divided in opinion, but we should not be divided on the destiny where we want to take the country. We should not be divided on the destiny where we envisage Zimbabwe in the next 50 years or 100 years. We can differ on how we want to take there. But there are fundamentals that we cannot compromise on. Fundamentals to do with the land, fundamentals to do with our sovereignty as a state, the fundamentals to do with our foreign policy, and our own security as a people. So if we do not compromise on that, we can have debates in parliament, you have an opposition party, the ruling party say this and that, but we should not be divided on what defines us as Zimbabweans and where we envisage Zimbabwe to be in the next 50 years or 100 years or 1,000 years.
Okay, that's really interesting, guys. Today we have Mr. Bizure. I'm also Mr. Bizure. I don't know which one would you want to be, Mr.
When
Bizure.
I am here, this one is not Mr. Bizure.
It's up to
Yeah.
you guys. So anyway, today you are hearing it from yourselves, guys, and it's up to you to draw your conclusions from what he's saying and all. And today we are talking about investment in Zimbabwe, investment opportunities in Zimbabwe. And going back to our topic, Mr. Bizure, because sometimes I feel like we
digress.
we are digressing as well. But going back to our topic, what is the niche that Zimbabwe has that you feel someone would say, I'm not going to go to Botswana to invest into Botswana, I'll go to Zimbabwe?
Okay. The niche that we have in Zimbabwe, I said it earlier on, but let me emphasize again, is that we've got the right brains in Zimbabwe and we've got the right natural resources. And we are now putting in place, over and above that, the legal framework to aid the doing of business, the policy framework to aid the doing of business, the ease of doing of business. So I think that we are going in the right direction in Zimbabwe. Put sticks in your ears when you get to hear negativity about Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe right now is the best place to be, the best place to invest in. And I assure you that if you would want to come to Zimbabwe, walk into any government ministry, the minister is there to give you an ear. If they're taking a cue from the president himself, who is saying, walk into my office, I can give you an ear, So that's the niche that we have. But let me go back to the question that you asked earlier on why one or two companies are moving away from Zimbabwe. I think I did not quite address that. I will not speak specifically for those companies, but I will generalize my response to say that there are a lot of variables that happen in business. I'll speak of two things. You would know that there was once a telecoms company that used to sell some cell phones back then, but it's no longer doing that. When iOS came in, they failed to adapt to the trends that were happening. We no longer have that in market. And it's on record that the head of that company said that we failed to adapt. We failed to read the winds. So I wouldn't know whether or not those said companies failed to read the winds and failed to adapt to the competition that is happening in Zimbabwe. But the other issue that happens for companies to want to opt to seek legal recourse or a rescue plan from the high courts and that would be for one or two reasons. The first reason would be obviously genuine, that they are getting into liquidation, etc., because of those reasons of failing to adapt or too much expenditure or lack of strategy generally. The second reason would be it has been a ploy from time immemorial that there are one or two companies or some business persons who of a rogue background, they acquire and strip the companies, and liquidate and then get the benefits of the assets of those companies upon pronouncement by the High Court that they are in liquidation. They have their debts cancelled, they have their judicial management and this and that. That whole process will benefit one or two persons if it is not surgically analyzed to see whether or not it's a genuine liquidation that is happening. So I do not know the circumstances surrounding these particular companies that you are saying, but generally it could be a genuine lack of adaptation and strategy to match the competition that is happening or to match the evolving trends and policies that are obtaining on the ground. Or it could be a way that business people have always done since time immemorial. They acquire, and they dispose, citing a bad operating environment, while they would have borrowed on those assets and stripped the company and etc. So I wouldn't know, but what I would encourage and what I would want our viewers to know is that if you come to Zimbabwe with the intention of wanting to do business, you will do business. And there is a book by an Indian author which says, fortune at the bottom of a pyramid. It would let you understand and appreciate that you make more millions by providing for those that are at the bottom of the pyramids. That's where a lot of money is circulating. Those $1, $5, $10 business, those $100 business, they make billions in a day.
Okay.
Yes.
That's
So when you
profound.
come to Zimbabwe, look from the basic to the top. But I would encourage that let's start from the basic. Make service provisions that Zimbabweans use every day. Manufacture those things that Zimbabweans use every day. Provide for basics that Zimbabwean would want to use every day, and you won't go wrong in business.
Let's start from the basics. Yeah. And Mr. Bizure, now just give us like your last shot, like the message that you want to give to the viewers.
My message is that let's go to the diasporians, let's go back home, let's invest. We are here. In Shona we say tirikubasa. Kunokubasa kokutsvaga mari. When you get the capital, invest it home. Build something, build something home. You will rest assured and getting your investment back. And Zimbabwe is the best place to invest in Africa, if not in the world.
Mr. Bizure, thank you so much for coming to the show and being our guest. And guys, I'm sure we have learned a lot today, and you are grateful as I am grateful to have Mr. Bizure with us here. And thank you, and thank you for your subscriptions. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for everything that you're doing for our podcast. And that is it for today. Until we meet again next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.